It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the beginning of our mini symposium. Many of you are in writing literacy and discourse or in freshman seminar and have read Claudia Rankin's Citizen along with Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. And part of what we'll try to do today and this evening is to put those two books in conversation. We have some student presenters here. So that will be a rewarding experience, not just for the students, many of whom are freshmen and presenting for the first time, but we also have our guest of honor here early, Professor Rankin. And the students will pose a question to Professor Rankin at the end of their remarks, and then we'll also open it for question and answer if we have the opportunity. Our first presenter will be introduced by our moderator for this session, Dr. Greg Carr, who many of you know is Chair of African American Studies, but also co-coordinator for Freshman Seminar. As the students continue to come in, we'll pass the programs and our presenters. We'll talk for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then pose the question. And we'll do, we think, a semi-informal, not a super formal introduction. Those of you who have read the book, as we said with Ta-Nehisi Coates, you don't need an introduction of Professor Rankin, but I have good home training, as does Dr. Carr, so I'll give you a brief little remark. The ultimate thing that you know already is that she is the author of Citizen and a number of other texts, and we'd like to welcome her to Howard. We were just writing up, and she said it was her first time on the campus, so we'll have to give her a very hearty Howard welcome. She is Errol Arnold Chair at the University of Southern California in English, and of course author of the best-selling, New York Times best-selling, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other awards that Citizen has received, in addition to some of its firsts for being nominated across categories and the genre bending that happens there. I give you now, though, to introduce the speakers, Dr. Greg Carr.
Without any further ado, I'm going to get right to these two young brothers, and we'll be joined in a moment by our third panelist, but we're going to begin this afternoon with Mr. Elijah Gonzalez, who will be delivering a presentation contrasting the elements of Claudia Rankin's Citizen and the It's You movement. He'll be followed by Mr. Brandon Watts, who is presenting on the topic, An Inevitable Side. So, Brother Gonzalez.
My name is Elijah Gonzalez. I'm a freshman and sociology major from Newark, New Jersey. I am the owner of a soon-to-be recognized movement named It's You. The It's You movement symbolizes the self-empowerment of African American individuals through all urban communities. The It's You movement's goal is to encourage African Americans throughout the nation that everything is all on you throughout any predicament and or situation at the end of the day. Whether it is good or bad, it is up to you to take full responsibility of your own actions on a daily basis. People mainly throughout urban communities need to know that the hood isn't entrapping you, your mind is. It's you who has to take that extra step outside of your comfort zone and become who you are destined to be. This movement puts emphasis on the characteristics, integrity, confidence, and a sense of pride when your back is against the wall for the worst. During the course of 2 months, myself and the rest of Freshman Seminar has been assigned to read the award-winning text, Citizen, by Claudia Rankin. The key elements that stood out to me personally were integrity, pride, and confidence dealing with the embedded racism, which corresponds to what the Issue movement stands for. This presentation will consist of 3 individual students that attend our very own Howard University. They will contrast the Issue movement and various elements of racism from the text Citizen by Claudia Rankin by expressing their personal opinions and experiences. Hope you enjoy the video.
So basically, one of the biggest misconceptions in America is that racism ended in 2008 when President Obama was elected. But that's 100% false. Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole, they do a great job of expressing that through their music. Kendrick Lamar, on his To Pimp a Butterfly album, his last album, he was real big on empowering the people. And J. Cole, he does a great job of putting into perspective his life as a black man, famous or not. That it's always a target on his back, and the cop gets behind you. As a black man, you're instantly going to freeze up a little bit. You're going to drive a certain way. It's crazy. I try to express those same sentiments through my poetry, and I talk about dealing with the cops, because I've dealt with cops before, being pulled over, racially profiled, and like shit.
The goal as for Black people, for the most part, has been to unify each other on the basis of a common struggle. But I think we've misinterpreted what the common struggle has been. I think Malcolm X said it in A Message from Grassroots. The racism struggle is an economic struggle in disguise. Us having a financial goal will pretty much allow us to have the courage to depend on each other. We were brought here, as a means to better someone else's financial, economic longevity, let's say. Once we develop our financial goals, I think that courage will fall in place.
For me, Trayvon Martin was a point of departure. When relating Trayvon Martin to the It's You movement, I can only speak on behalf of myself, and I can only speak about what happened with Trayvon Martin and how that affected me. When I heard on the news that he was murdered, I thought to myself that I could somewhat rely on a due process for what I felt was an obvious injustice. Here was a young man walking down in his neighborhood, going to get an iced tea and a bag of Skittles, and his life was taken from him. And the media talked about him as though he deserved it. In Baltimore, I carried those names with me. I carried those names with me in prayer, and I prayed to God that I would not become one of them. I prayed to God that I wouldn't become one of them. When the Baltimore Police Department raided my protest, they came down on us with batons and pepper spray. And I'll never forget, God Almighty, I'll never forget what they did to that 11-year-old boy and that 12-year-old girl. They clotheslined her neck and hogtied her limp body into the back of a police car. I carried these names with me. Trayvon Martin, you did not die in vain. You have not died in vain. You have not died in vain. We carry you with us. We carry you with us, and your name is so heavy on our soul. That's all I gotta say.
Just defining who we are as people, individually.
I'm telling you, right now,
It doesn't just have to be J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar. No, it could be any mainstream artist, not even just rappers, any artist. I challenge all of y'all, the Meek Mills of the world and Big Sean's, any of y'all can bring these ideas into mainstream music and put those images of pain onto the radio and into the airwaves,
it's you.
It's you.
It's you.
Claudia, what do you think should be the key goals of contemporary movements like Black Lives Matter and my very own It's You movement?
Hello. Good evening, Professor Rankin, Howard University faculty, and my Howard University peers. Today I'll be doing a presentation on Section 4 in Claudia's Rankin Citizen, where she talks about the inevitable side and the relationship that memory plays with that. The title of my presentation is called An Inevitable Side. She starts off Section 4 by saying, to live to the day, sometimes you moan like deer, sometimes you sigh. The world says, stop that. Another sigh. Another stop that. Moaning elicits laughter, sighing upsets. Perhaps each sigh is drawn into existence to pull under. Who knows? Truth be told, you can no more control those sighs than that which brings the sighs about. I myself grew up in the third poorest city in the nation, San Bernardino, California. It is a city that provides better options for youth on the streets than the education system seems to provide. Then it has a judicial system that will turn around and lock up those same youth for doing what they have to do to survive to the next day. Many of the young men I grew up with are either dead, jail, or in the streets now. Many of the women I grew up with are now pregnant, raising children when they are still children themselves. Matter of fact, the high school I went to had a daycare center for children. That's how many pregnant teenagers were in my city. I could have easily been swallowed into a statistic, but through sacrifice and a dream, I believe I made it out. However, there are consequences in making it out. You are forced to live through the daily side that Claudia Rankin describes in section 4 of Citizen. She goes on to say that the sigh is a pathway to breath. It allows breathing. That's just self-preservation. No one fabricates that. You sit down, you sigh. You stand up, you sigh. The sigh is a warring exhale of an ache. You wouldn't call it an illness. Still, it is not the iteration of a free being. For me, the sigh that I am forced to live through is a sigh that comes from watching so many beautiful young minds become wasted because of the society that we live in. I used to think that racism was once over because I believed whatever the high school bias textbooks would tell me in school. But if racism was truly over, why do young black men have to walk down the streets with the fear of becoming targeted by a gang or becoming a victim of police misconduct or becoming a suspect for a crime? This is when the signs start to begin. And they even became worse when I realized that there are people, sometimes even black people, who would sit back in the seats and say that everything is all good. While 5 minutes away from their suburbs, the genocide of young African-American males is taking place right in front of their eyes. So although I did make it out and I'm gaining more knowledge than I could possibly imagine here at Howard University, I get a text on my phone that tells me that a good friend of mine that I've grown up with will be serving the next 10 years of his life in prison. I put down my phone, I think about all that I've been through, and I sigh. I thought that seeing a different environment like Howard University would take the sigh away. But I realize now that the sigh lives through me. Me and the sigh are one. It will never go away. She goes on to talk about memory in section 4. She says, "You like to think that memory goes far back, though memory was never recommended. Forget all that, the world says. The world's had a lot of practice. No one should adhere to the facts that contribute to narrative, the facts that creates lives. The world is wrong. You can't put the past behind you. It's buried in you. It's turned your flesh into its own cupboard. Not everything is useful, but it all comes down from the world to be stored in you. Memory is a tough place. You were there, and this is not the truth. It is also not a lie. This memory plays a part in me because while I was on a voyage to Ghana, West Africa, I visited a place called Cape Coast Slave Castle. During this tour, I would be taken to a room called the Door of No Return. This would be the final resting spot before Africans were taken off on a slave ship, never to see their home again. It was at that moment, though, that a memory hit me. A memory that had taken place 400 years ago. Suddenly, the whole room seemed to become familiar to me, and I realized something, that I was there. I was there when my people were chained together like animals and thrown on a ship. I was there. I was there when the ship sailed away from the land that I would never see again. I was there. These events are instilled in my mind that this is not the truth. It is also not a lie. See, my whole life I have been told to let go of the thought of slavery, but I started to begin to see the reason for that. Perhaps they wanted me to let go of the memory of slavery so they could forget about the history of white supremacy in American society. Perhaps they didn't want me to see why inner city communities like my city of San Bernardino, California were truly made. They were made to keep black people in a state of inferiority while others climb the economic ladders of success. I believe that is the sole purpose of why we as African Americans were brought to here in America in the first place. So when I look at all this, I realize that it's not their fault. These young black men that I see caught up in gangs and the legal system and in jails and in drugs, I don't see fault in them. I see fault in the system that raised them. The system that never gave regard to their citizenship in the first place. Professor Rankin ends her section saying, feel good, feel better, move forward, let it go, come on. And I realize that since I've left for college, I've tried to let go of my past to possibly relieve the daily sigh that I have to live through. But as I stated before, my sigh is inevitable. And as Professor Rankin describes a person that is watching Serena Williams completely snap on television and later get chastisement for how she snapped, I too turn on the television. I see the first African American president of the United States, Barack Obama, and I think to myself, perhaps there is hope for African American youth growing up in inner city communities. But as I turn to the next station, I see a man named Donald Trump, a man who is one of the most outspoken individuals in today's society. My problem with this is not that he is outspoken and speaks on things that politicians rather not. My problem lies with the fact that he faces no consequences for his outspokenness, such as other black men have been throughout history. His harsh words and stereotypes have offended people, but yet some Americans still see him as a potential president. But yet we have a president that was ridiculed because he said the word nigger when he was trying to tell another story about something that happened. And I realized that Malcolm X was a black man that had an outspoken point of view towards racism and advancement of black people in America. In return, he would be assassinated for these outspoken words. However, unlike Malcolm, I don't see the assassination of Donald Trump coming soon. I think America is quite content with him. So I put down my remote, I put the TV on mute, and I sigh. The sigh, I realize now, is an inevitable sigh. And my question to you, Professor Rankin, is, to what extent do American political conditions influence violence in black communities? And to what extent is this violence a matter of internal conflicts? Thank you. Okay.
Hi, good day. My name is Sakile Granam. I'm an undecided freshman from Trinidad and Tobago. And I have a reflective, creative nonfiction. And I think before starting, I need to mention that where I grew up, I could probably count on both hands the number of white people that I knew. But at the same time, I always felt like that was the aspiration. So my piece is called The Necessity of Swallowing and the Right to Rage. To be born black is too often to be born with the tragic wisdom that your body does not belong to you. It is to be born knowing in some fundamental way that you alone are not the architect of your destiny, that there is some invisible force holding you up against Zora Neale Hurston's sharp white background. To be born black is to be born vulnerable to the sharpness of that background. To know that in that vulnerability, those who have pinned you immovable can fill you with whatever they choose. To be born black is to be born with your mouth open, so that you will learn the art of swallowing as quickly as possible. To swallow means to accept the untruths that others force upon you, to understand that others are allowed to encroach on and defile the space of your existence without any repercussions. The law protects you, but the streets, the schools, the churches do not. The government buildings defend your rights, but those who work within them are party to your swallowing. Reading Citizen, I am forced to relive my own uncomfortable experiences, to conjure up memories of polarizing consciousness that lead to a type of alienation so subtle but so unnerving that oftentimes you alone notice it. When you are suddenly no longer a part of or included or seen as human in a way that no amount of laws protecting your institutionalized citizenship can protect you from. There is no law against making a black girl hate herself. There is no amendment banning the sharp white background against which most of us are forced to discover ourselves. It is a background that reaches across both sides of the Atlantic, that touches every one of us within the diaspora, within the continent Africans have made of the entire world. Citizen asks the question to which we almost always have the answer, but that we all find ourselves asking anyway. What did you say? What did you say? After a long pause, and uttered across from the wide, suddenly created distance between you and your aggressor's sharp comment, a distance as wide as the Atlantic, a sharpness as stark as the whiteness against which you are thrown, the whiteness through which you discovered that you were in fact black. There was no law to protect me when a little light-skinned girl tilted her head, half smiled at me and said, "You know, you'd be so pretty if you weren't black." There was no law to stave off turmoil that ensued between my body and my mind and my body, the way that there are laws to protect Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, and Sandra Bland. But here we all are, black, alive, and dead, many of us a mixture of both, and none of us are protected. What did you say? I cannot fathom how I am supposed to respond to this, so I swallow her words. I swallow the compliment of my hypothetical beauty that she thrusts upon me, swallow the rage and confusion and sadness, swallow it all so that I am the only one in the circle of girls who's uncomfortable. I do not know when I learned to swallow. I only know now that I have been swallowing for some time, and that the white background that had silenced me was more invisible in Trinidad, in the land of my birth, than it was in the treacherous American stage Rankin has set for his stories. What does it mean then to lack a citizenship when those who have taken it from you are not visible, when colorism is far more prominent? For the whites have drawn in on themselves, receded into Port of Spain, into the capital, into their mansions and gated communities, but still there is a silent hold on all of us, owners of brown bodies, that we succumb to the fate of aspiring to that to which we cannot see. When we do see, these moments are almost always uncomfortable, and again end in swallowing. I am 18, with my first job at a promotional company, making conversation with my white supervisor. I remember that I had enjoyed the conversation until he made it a point to compliment my skin, to tell me how beautiful he thought it was, and how much he loved black women, to tell me how he would marry me just to show me off. He laughed at himself as if he is funny, and I laugh back as if I am flattered, but really I want to scrape the brown off of myself to escape his gaze. I want to swallow this too, like I swallowed everything else. I swallow mostly the questions. Why do you feel comfortable telling me this? Why is this okay to you? Why is the thought of making a trophy of my body funny to you? I think of this when I read about Serena and her black body held up as a spectacle, open to comment and critique and ridicule. I think of the whiteness of that background she was thrown against, and how I wasn't so much thrown against a white background than I was the background, the negative space onto which whiteness and its entitlement was thrown. I think of the unique way in which black women lack citizenship, and how swallowing for us can mean the difference in a paycheck, the difference between winning and losing a match, even the difference between life and death. I reflect on the birth of West Indian citizenship, and what it means for me as a Trinidadian, and what citizenship means for an African American, and what it means for black people as global citizens. To have rights is to have citizenship. To have citizenship is to have your humanity recognized, and even further, to have it deemed worthy of protection. I reflect on how I've crossed half an ocean to stand where I'm standing now, and everywhere I look, I see black bodies, and I still see them open and unprotected. I see that we are not allowed to open our mouths unless it is to swallow, unless it is to be fed what our own distorted narratives and realities, to take what others have decided we are deserving of taking. We do not have the right to open our mouths in anger or confusion or rage, since our rage is not protected, since our rage is not acknowledged, since our rage is not tied to some form of humanity. Black rage has been too often depicted as savage, deranged, unjustified fury, devoid of rational human thinking. So is it that we are incapable of being rational? Are we unable to be anything but savage? Or is it our rage is so demonized because the others do not understand how we could possibly feel deserving of anything better than violence? The violence discussed in Citizen, Rankin identified as decidedly American, but I would argue that this is present almost everywhere that black people are present, though the manifestations may vary. We have been traumatized by this violence, but its persistence has forced us to normalize the actions of our aggressors, to master the art of diffusing conflict, to apologize for things for which we are not truly sorry. In swallowing, we relinquish, even only momentarily, our right to rage. We swallow all the daily ways our humanity is ignored, all the daily ways the real citizens prove and remind us that we are not. And as we swallow, as we choose the option we think leads to our preservation, we slowly, silently choke. Thank you. And my question is, how different were your experiences in Jamaica compared to your experiences in America with regards to race and citizenship? And do you feel like any of the instances of racism overlap? Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. It's so nice to be here. I feel very honored to be here. I always felt like what was happening at Howard was a special thing that I didn't have access to. So thank you for opening your doors to me. So I'm just going to go through the three semester. The first film and talk I thought was really interesting. I loved the It's You movement. Do you remember, one, because it starts with the I and ends with the you. So it's an IU subjective objective space within the It's You movement. I also love the replication of the U's, so that the U becomes and holds the plurality of that U. Do you remember that? It was Y-O-U-U-U-U as opposed to Y-O-U. And so that becomes visually a representation of plurality. So I thought that was great. So the question was, if you remember, what do you think should be the key goals of movements like Black Lives Matter and It's You movement? I don't know, but I can tell you what it is that I appreciate about the Black Lives Matter movement. And I wrote a piece for the New York Times in which I talked about this a little bit. It seemed to me that Black Lives Matter was insisting on mourning time in the spaces that in the past have allowed Black death to become a silent thing. So that they were walking into places like the Symphony, into restaurants, into our streets, and saying, I refuse your refusal to remember, to recognize, to hold these moments present. And that's what, has been especially moving to me about that moment. And different from, say, what's happening now at Yale and Missouri. I mean, the Black Lives Matter up until now has been about looking at the trauma and keeping the trauma present. I feel that what's happening in Yale and Missouri goes to Sakili Graham's talk about Black rage and the refusal to swallow. That this moment, which is, I think, a very exciting moment, is about Black living as opposed to Black Lives Matter. And so we don't have to arrive in the loss of lives to object to the treatment and the interference in Black living, so that the quality of our lives and the insistence for the quality of our lives to be equal to the quality of anybody's life is enough to cause the football team to go on strike. That we're not going to wait till we have a dead body to bring our bodies out into the street. So I think that is incredibly exciting. The second, Brandon's speech, which I thought was also very moving in terms of the way it spoke to memory. Thomas Hobbes, the philosopher in the Leviathan, talks about how memory and imagination is the same thing. He says that memory is nothing more than a decayed sense, and the imagination is memory. And why I love Hobbes's definition is because it ties all of history into the creation of a new moment. So the imagination, the imagined future moment, comes from what we remember, all that we've lived through, that it's not a disconnected time, that we move through those times in order to create something new. So to say I was there means that I can be here, and here will move forward into a new there. So that I really loved the trajectory of Brandon's talk. And your question, Brandon, was to what extent do American political conditions influence violence, and to what extent is the violence a matter of internal conflict? I think that there, you know, I loved also that you didn't isolate neighborhood violence from police violence, that your 360-degree memory allowed us to understand that it's all interconnected, that you cannot separate out a kind of disaffected youth in the neighborhood from the policies that defunded the school and defunded programs in the neighborhoods and caused a certain living condition in that neighborhood. And also you tied it into the incarceration, system in this country and the warehousing of Black men inside those institutions. So I just thought it was fantastic that you made it all one thing, because it is one thing. And even though your question is, to what extent is the political conditions influence violence, I think what you actually answered the question, which is to say that you cannot pull all of it apart, that it is one breathing machine, and all of it put in place by a white supremacist beginning that always had a Jim Crow attitude towards Blackness in this country, which was tied to the economics of it. And so the final question was to speak more personally to the difference in my experiences of racism in Jamaica, West Indies, and the United States. I think that in the West Indies, in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, for me, one of the many ways that racism played itself out was in a kind of traditional Frantz Fanon, black skin, white mass rendition of a kind of pathology of Blackness. So that in the hotels, all the women in the face of the hotel, as opposed to the servant staff, but the face, the people at the front desk, all of them light-skinned women. So it was going to play out the racial difference given the tools that you had, right? So if everybody's a Black, you're going to choose the lightest Black one. You're going to try and give the tourism industry the most comfort it can get by bringing itself as close to the face of Blackness as you can. And that is something I think as a kid in Jamaica, I noticed, and within my own family, I remember my mother saying to me, it's really great, you're so smart, because you're not that good looking. You're not as, light as your sister. And I remember at the time thinking, you're fucked up. And I did, I remember thinking that. I remember looking at her and thinking, it's too bad about you. And, but I think that's how, she was not individual. I think the taking in of white standards and white racist standards around the Black body into the Black body so that the Black person doesn't need to be in the room is something that plays itself out all the time in Jamaica, and I'm sure in other countries. Structurally, I think that institutions like the IMF own Jamaica, so that economically what's happening there means that the funds are being pulled from the country, and then you still see poverty within the citizenship of that country. So people like Manley who now say, I regret selling the country. Sold the country. And we, and citizens there end up with a sort of substandard living and end up with the same kind of treatment without the face of whiteness. There's no Donald Trump. We're getting it from Siega, we're getting it from Manley, we're getting it from whoever's in power. But it's still the standards that have been metered out in the United States to the populations here. So that's my response.
I'm interested in hearing, I don't know. You want to hear what they
Well,
have to
maybe,
think?
maybe they should have a counter.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Exactly right. I'm gonna get out of the way.
Well, I just,
You don't want to put this at the microphone?
I just think it's interesting how what you said, how it all ties into one big reading machine, like you say in your section. So when I look back at it again, I look at how things are created, how it's literally like one big system. You can't just separate somebody who was killed by a police officer and somebody who was killed by a gangbanger, like make it two different situations. These are, although it's like two different instances, and one may be more tragic than the other, one may be like off of racism, one may be off of disrespect. A black person's life was taken from this, and we should take into consideration that.
You could also disagree with me.
I agree with Professor Rankin as far as what she was saying about how the black community needs to come more together, because I used to always, a couple of days ago, me and my roommate had a conversation after making this video, is what is us as a black people? What's our goal? It sounds like an easy question, but it's not. But it sounds like an easy question, but it's kind of a tough one, because we say that our goal is to unite as a race, although in these communities we're still killing each other. And I think that's kind of like us as a black people. We need to come together and unify even more, to the point that we can push this movement as far as like not falling to what the white people are expecting us to do.
I just want to comment on two things. One is the title, and one is the inclusion of pictures, and like just the general format of the text. I like that you put American on the front of the book. I like that it's kind of like insisting that this is a part of America. This is a part of American history, and it's a part that people tend not to talk about. America has a long legacy of having a very revisionist kind of history, liking to leave out parts. And the idea that you put on the cover, yes, this is America, this is American, this is part of the culture that you're so proud of, this is part of home of the free, land of the brave, this is a part of all of that. You can't just take, the things that you're deemed movie to put in a textbook and just ignore the ugliness of it. I also like that a lot of the pages weren't fully written on, and again, you can disagree with me, but I like that it gave the look of something that lacked completion. So, all of these conversations when somebody is saying something to you, but you don't complete the conversation, you don't complete the process of correcting, of addressing, you just kind of leave it alone. The lack of completion of the lives of men and women who were, targeted by police. There's a lack of completion. They will never, live to see, the completion. They will never live at a proper, natural age. The lack of completion within the way that history is dealt with. Everything seems kind of jagged and spacey and incomplete. And as much as you fill us with experiences, it's kind of the spaces to me feel like spaces where we fill our own experiences and spaces where we ask questions of, okay, what now? So I like that. And the biggest part to me that like stood out was the page that said, I do not always feel colored. I feel most colored when putting against a shop my background. And I was like, yes, this is me. You are forced to learn about yourself within a context that is not you. And I think that is destructive. I just like how you put that quote together. So,
You know, can I say one other thing about your talk, actually? I forgot to say. Coming back up. I really, speaking of liking, I really loved the idea of swallowing, because what it ended up doing was feminizing and sexualizing the violence in a way that I initially hadn't thought about, because initially you think about it as related to silence, you know, to swallow what you were about to say. But then if you bring it all the way back to the slave period and think about the way Black women's bodies were treated during that time and continue to be treated, then it also turned into a kind of a rape moment. So I thought that was also quite effective. Thank you. All right, we're running back down.
All right, well, that was, I think we're off to our auspicious thought. Thank y'all so much. We are glad that you are here. And we will ease out of this session, but before we do close, Professor Rankin, we've been joined by the Associate Dean of the College of Fine Arts, the Division of Fine Arts, rather. This was a college, and still in many ways functions as our intellectual, artistic home, and that's Dr. Gwendolyn Everett, who's back in the back. So, hey, Dean, how you doing? Make sure everybody knows
Hard
you.
to be inconspicuous with Dr. Carr and Dr. Williams, we always shout outs, but thank you so much for being here and letting me sit.
Of course, no, thank you for hosting us. So with that, I guess we'll ease out of it and we'll get prepared, have a bit of a break before we have section 2, and allow our guests, now member of our extended family, to have a moment to breathe. So, thanks everybody.